So I'm Ashish Kothari, Pallava Bagla, also in the original 1983 trek that we did on the Narmada, and Nandita Hazarika, also very much part of that same
Yes.
gang that
Gang.
did the
So
50-day walk and boat and bus ride and
truck.
whatever else. And let's start with talking about your memories of that trek.
Yeah, so I think we just finished our graduation. It was 83. I finished my BA in geography from Miranda House, and then, we were part of Kalpavriksh. So I joined the trek, in sections. So I wasn't there when this Ashish and the others started from Bharuch. So I joined them in Ratlam and then left them at Bhopal. We had applied to the Ministry of Sports under some scheme, adventure scheme, where
Promotion of adventure scheme.
yeah, promotion. Little did they know it was promotion of something else.
See, there was a little discussion which was going on that the government was planning to make a very large number of dams on the river Narmada. And one of our colleagues, Rajiv Bhartari, had given us a hint that something like this was happening. So in Kalpavriksh, it was decided that let's poke our nose into it. I was in second year of college at that point. No idea what journalism was, no idea what research was, no idea what we were getting into. But we heard that there would be 30 large dams, 300 medium dams, and 3,000 small dams in this 1,300 kilometer length of the river Narmada. So we decided that we need to walk from Bharuch to Amarkantak, which was along the length of the Narmada. So in phases and batches, and some of us remained largely throughout the entire trek. So I have distinct memories that Sardar Sarovar Dam, today which has become more famous not for the dam but for the Statue of Unity, was essentially a coffer dam at that point, meaning a small diversion dam had been created, and upstream, Narmada Sagar dam was just a single limestone white line on the sides of the mountain. Only the Tawa Dam and Bargi Dam at that point existed. So the idea was to see if this is going to help the people or not. But essentially, I think Ashish drove the point, and we ended up writing a 52-page report.
Yeah, so I think basically, I mean, one of the interesting things, of course, was that before we did the trek, we also tried to look at literature on studies on the impacts of dams, the environmental impact, the social, cultural impacts, and there were very few, very few, almost none in India. There were a few from abroad.
None at all.
So we were kind of, really doing things from scratch. Making our own questionnaires in our heads, trying to say, okay, how do we do this kind of study? But in those 50 days, essentially what we came up with when we visited dam site after dam site after dam site and talked to people, Parikrama Vasis, some of the local groups,
Other stakeholders,
local villagers would be affected, and Adivasis, went through some of the forests with some incredible wildlife. We realized that there were going to be a whole series of extremely negative impacts, which included the displacement, physical displacement of hundreds of thousands of people if you take all the dams together, the submergence of some of the most beautiful forests of central India, displacement of the wildlife there. And even when we actually started asking, okay, but what about the benefits? Because, there was this whole question saying, okay, there's going to be some loss, but there's lots of benefits. And we started examining that and realized, even talking to people in Gujarat, that in fact, even the so-called irrigation and hydroelectricity benefits were extremely limited and would be limited to a certain section of people, whereas those who were adversely impacted were the ones who were already on the margins of society, like the Adivasis and the small farmers and so on. So basically we just wrote all of that up. The message that these kinds of large hydroelectricity and irrigation projects are actually more negative, and therefore they're not really development, they're more destruction.
and I think later, I think the concise version of that also came in the Ecologist.
The Ecologist,
Economic and Political
Yeah.
Weekly,
And
Sanctuary Asia, Frontline.
I don't know if you should take the credit for it, but I guess, the movement, the whole Narmada Bachao, the movement, I think essentially did, I think to a large extent, rely on the information which I think
some of the initial things.
initial,
The movement started in
yeah,
1985,
85.
very soon
So,
after.
yeah.
But Meda acknowledges that
Yeah,
she
yeah,
had
she does.
that
One of
our
those.
report, which is the Kalpavriksh report, preceded her starting the Narmada Bachao Andolan.
Oh, yeah.
So, and if you look back, I think when was it? 20 or 25 years later, when Ram Guha wrote that, revisited that report and wrote that this was a report which changed the development dialogue for the country, and he coined a phrase saying these were student researchers. Maybe you should add here how it impacted the World Bank funding.
Some of the evidence that we had generated there, which was in the report, and then subsequently we also, Kalpavriksh brought out a number of other small booklets and reports, and the evidence, of course, generated by the Andolan itself, and the movement was instrumental in getting the World Bank to pull out, getting the Japanese also to rethink their support. Of course, we know that despite all of this, the dam has come up. It's almost complete. It's been really rammed through by the powers that be. But nevertheless, as you very rightly said, it's something that kind of generated a different kind of a discussion and dialogue nationally, and perhaps led to other movements, not just our report again, but the Narmada Andolan, which would have been more successful in stopping such destructive projects, and probably many across the world, not even just in India.
I think we had no vested interests as such, so when we did it, it was just with a clear, I think it like a clean slate. You did something and you never thought that what would be the consequences. So we thought that this is something, we believe in, and we want to do it, and we want to see it through, And even the subsequent projects which Kalpavriksh, later took, for example, the stand on or the work on dams in the northeast.
Yes.
So that formed the foundation, and then I quote the Narmada, our experience in Narmada and how people just because, so Narmada was much in news because obviously number of, projects which are coming up, but also the number of people who were being displaced. So the impact in then was much more. Like 20 years ago, there was hardly any awareness about it because the displacement, if you looked, was nothing. I mean, you're talking of just few thousand families being displaced, compared to lakhs in Narmada. But then this...
But the ecological
the ecological consequences are huge, much more probably than... But the whole Narmada, work or study, helped us to understand and then steer, our thinking and our action.
No, also I think, see, Narmada debate for the first time brought into picture the whole issue about oustees and about how to rehabilitate people who have been ousted because of a certain developmental process. And Ashish may know the correct figures, but I don't think those 30 large dams ever came up, nor did the 300 medium dams come up on Narmada, nor did the 3,000 small dams which were supposed to come up on the Narmada ever came up in that numbers. Yes, Narmada Sagar is up and running, Sardar Sarovar is up and running, Tawa and Bargi are up and running, but beyond that, I haven't heard of other big dams being made. Maheshwar, Omkareshwar, correct.
But of the 30 big dams, most have been shelved. Have been shelved. Yeah.
So when you look at this, somewhere as student researchers, I still take a lot of pride. We have, in a way, saved the river Narmada. But imagine what would have been the condition if all of these development projects had come through. Let us go back and look at the command area of Sardar Sarovar.
It's in bad shape.
What has happened there? Because all the benefits were to happen in the command area.
Yeah.
I think this is a time we need to revisit the command area and see whatever was promised by, what was his name? Alag.
YK
YK Alag and his team of Yojana Bhavan, and then which has become Niti Ayog now. Whether that has really the cost benefit.
One of the reports in the late 80s that Rahul Ram led was the sole question of, it's called the muddy waters. It's really about questioning the so-called benefits, the 1 million hectares to be irrigated and all of that. None of that. In fact, Kutch is still not getting water. This many decades after it. So, yeah, I think we should do that. We should also do an anniversary trek at some point or the other down a similar route.
It was
And I think what stays with us really is also the passion to keep questioning.
Yes.
To keep asking questions, to keep speaking truth to power when power kind of dominates things and wants to do things in a certain way, to actually, at least, at the very least, ask the questions.
Yeah.
And
So I mean, the bonding which has remained, so all of us may have drifted into different, our own personal spaces and profession. but I think that will always remain, and I think it has endured.
Yeah.
You know.
No,
So-
for me, the learning has been
Yes,
immense,
yeah.
and I, from an activist, turned into a journalist, and the basic idea of asking questions has remained. And most recently, even on 7th of September, when I was hammered for asking a question and trolled, essentially is a carry forward from the days in Kalpavriksh and Narmada when we were told to ask questions to authority. And that is, I think, an art and a trait which is dying, and I think it needs to be cultivated a lot more, because generations need to know how to ask the right questions.
Yes.
Without fear.
Without fear, absolutely.
Without fear,
All right,
absolutely.
That is
so,
important.
so another hug for all
Yes.
of us.
Yes.
Let's get back together again.